know?
Produced a certain barbaric splendor with the gilded fish-scale ceiling. It would have been nice to need only speak the words, but actually putting them on paper with her own hand produced a pleasure akin to that she felt in sketching. The script of this age was quite simple, and learning to duplicate another's style had been no more difficult. Signing with a flourish, not her own name, of course, she sanded the thick page, then folded it and sealed it with one of the signet rings of various sizes that made a decorative line across the writing table. The hand and sword of Arad Doman impressed on an irregular circle of blue and green wax. "Take this to Lord Iturralde with all speed," she said, "and say only what I told you." "As fast as horses can carry me, my lady." Nasran bowed as he took the letter, one finger stroking thin black moustaches above a winning smile. Square and deeply brown in a well-fitting blue coat, he was handsome, just not sufficiently handsome. "I received this from the Lady Tuva, who died of her wounds after telling me that she was a courier from Al-Salam and had been attacked by a gray man." "Make sure there is human blood on it," she admonished. She doubted anyone in this time could tell human blood from any other, but she had found too many surprises to take an unnecessary chance. "Enough for realism, not enough to spoil what I wrote." His black eyes lingered warmly on her as he bowed again, but as soon as he straightened he hurried to the door, boots thudding on the pale yellow marble floor. He did not notice the servants with their eyes fixed ardently on her, or he affected not to notice, though he had once been a friend of the young man. Only a touch of compulsion had been needed to make Nasran nearly as avid to obey as they, not to mention certain that he might yet taste her charms again. She laughed softly. Well, he believed he had tasted them, just a little prettier, and he might have. Of course, he would have been useless for anything else then. He would ride horses to death, reaching Iturralde, and if that message, delivered by Al-Salam's close cousin, supposedly coming from the king himself and with grey men trying to stop it, did not satisfy the great lord's command to increase chaos, nothing would, short of balefire. And it would serve her own ends very nicely as well. Her own ends. Grendal's hand went to the only ring on the table that was not a signet, a plain golden band too small for any but her little finger. It had been a pleasant surprise to find an Angreal attuned to women among Samael's possessions, a pleasant surprise to have time to find much of anything useful with Althor and those puppies who called themselves Ashaman, constantly in and out of Samael's chambers in the great hall of the council. They had stripped it bare of what she had not taken. Dangerous puppies, all of them, especially Althor, and she had not wanted to risk anyone being able to draw a line from Samael to her. Yes, she must increase the pace of her own plans and distance herself from Samael's disaster. Abruptly, a vertical slash of silver appeared at the far end of the room, bright against the tapestries hanging between the heavy gilded mirrors, and a crystalline chime rang loud. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. Someone remembered the courtesies of a more civilized age, it seemed. Standing, she forced the plain band of gold down against the ruby ring on her smallest finger, and embraced Saidar through it before channeling the web that would sound an answering chime for whoever wanted to open a gateway. The Angreal did not offer much, yet anyone who thought they knew her strength would find a shock. The gateway opened, and two women in nearly identical red and black silk dresses stepped through warily. At least Moghedien moved cautiously, dark eyes flickering in search of traps, hands smoothing her wide skirts. The gateway winked out after a moment, but she held on to Saidar. A sensible precaution, though Moghedien had always been a great one for precautions. Grendal did not let go of the source either. Moghedien's companion, a short young woman with long silver hair and vivid blue eyes, stared about her coldly, hardly more than glancing in Grendal's direction. By her demeanor, she might have been a prime counselor forced to endure the company of common laborers and intent on ignoring their existence. A foolish girl to imitate the spider. Red and black did not suit her coloring, and she should have made better use of such an impressive bosom. "This is Sindane, Grendal," Moghedien said. "We are working together." She did not smile when she named the haughty young woman, but Grendal did. A pretty name for a more than pretty girl. But what twist of fate had led some mother of this time to give her daughter a name that meant last chance? Sindane's face remained cold and smooth, but her eyes flared. A beautiful doll carved from ice with hidden fires. It seemed she knew the meaning and did not like it. "What brings you and your friend, Moghedien?" Grendal asked. The spider was the very last she had expected to come out from the shadows. "Have no fear of speaking in front of my servants." She gestured, and the pair by the door sank to their knees, pressed their faces to the floor. They would not quite fall dead by her simple command, but close. "What interest can you find in them when you destroy anything that might make them interesting?" Sindane demanded, striding arrogantly across the floor. She held herself very straight, striving for every hair of height. "Do you know that Samael is dead?" Grendal kept her own face smooth with a little effort. She had supposed this girl some friend of the dark, whom Moghedien had picked up to run errands, perhaps a noble who thought her title counted. But now that she was close, the girl was stronger in the one power than she herself. Even in her own age, that had been uncommon among men, and very rare indeed among women. On the instant, on instinct, she changed her intention to deny any contact with Samael. "I suspected," she replied, directing a false smile over the young woman's head at Moghedien. How much did she know? Where had the spider found a girl so much stronger than she, and why was she traveling with her? Moghedien had always been jealous of anyone with more strength, or more of anything. "He used to visit me, importuning my help in one mad plan or another. I never rejected him outright. You know Samael was a dangerous man to reject. He appeared every few days without fail, and when he stopped, I assumed something dire had happened to him. Who is this girl, Moghedien? A remarkable find." The young woman stepped closer, staring up at her with eyes like blue fire. "She told you my name. That is all you need know." The girl knew she spoke to one of the chosen, and yet her tone remained frost. Even given her strength, this was no simple friend of the dark, unless she was insane. "Have you paid attention to the weather, Grendal?" Abruptly, Grendal realized that Moghedien was letting the girl do all the talking, hanging back until a weakness became apparent. And Grendal had been letting her. "I do not suppose you came to tell me of Samael's death, Moghedien," she said sharply, "or to talk about weather. You know I seldom go outside."
Hey, Newfoundlander,
Nature
how
was
you doing?
unruly, lacking order. There were not even windows in this room,
Hope you're
nor
doing
most
well.
that she used. "What do you want?" The
You know
dark-haired
what?
woman was edging sideways
Let's go
along
ahead
the
and do
wall.
this
The glow of
for
the
you,
one
bro.
power still surrounded her. Grendal stepped casually so that both remained in her sight. "You
Definitely
make a
glad to see
mistake,
you. It's been a
Grendal."
little while.
A chilly smile barely curved Sindane's full lips. She was enjoying this. "I lead between us. Moghedien is in a bad odor with Moradin for her recent mistakes." Wrapping her arms around herself, Moghedien shot the silver-haired little woman a scowl as good as any spoken confirmation. Suddenly, Sindane's big eyes opened even wider, and she gasped, shuddering. Moghedien's glare turned malicious. "You lead for the moment," she sneered. "Your place in his eyes is not far better than mine." And then she gave a start and shivered, biting her lip. Was she being toyed with? Grendal wondered. The pure hatred for each other on the two women's faces seemed unfeigned. Either way, she would see how they enjoyed being played. Unconsciously rubbing her hands together, rubbing the angreal on her finger, she moved to a chair without taking her eyes from the pair. The sweetness of Sidar flowing into her was a comfort. Not that she needed comfort, but there was something odd here. The high, straight back,
One
thickly
second, I'll be
carved and
right back.
gilded, made the chair seem a throne, though it was no different from any other in the room. Such things affected even the most sophisticated on levels they never knew consciously. She sat leaning back with her legs crossed, one foot kicking idly, the picture of a woman at her ease, and made her voice bored. Since you lead, child, tell me, when this man who calls himself Death is in his skin, who is he? What is he? Moradin is nameless. The girl's voice was calm and cold and arrogant. The Great Lord has decided it is time for you to serve the nameless too. Grendel jerked upright. This is preposterous. She could not keep the anger from her voice. A man I've never heard of has been named the Great Lord's regent on Earth? She did not mind when others tried to manipulate her. She always found a way to turn their schemes against them. But Moghedien must take her for a half-wit. She had no doubt that Moghedien was directing this obnoxious girl, whatever they claimed, whatever looks they stabbed at each other. I serve the Great Lord and myself, no other. I think the two of you should go now and play your little game elsewhere. Demon Dread might be diverted by it, or Semirag. Be careful how you channel in leaving. I have set a few inverted webs, and you would not want to trigger one. That was a lie, but a very believable one, so it came as a shock when Moghedien suddenly channeled and every lamp in the room went out, plunging them into darkness. Instantly Grendel flung herself from the chair so as not to be where they had last seen her, and she also channeled even as she moved, weaving a web of light that hung to one side, a sphere of pure white that cast lurid shadows about the room, and revealed the pair clearly. Without hesitation she channeled again, drawing the full strength of the little ring. She did not need it all, or even most, but she wanted every advantage she could find. Attack her, would they? A net of compulsion tightened on each of them before they could twitch. She had spun the net strong for anger's sake, nearly strong enough to do harm, and the women stood staring at her adoringly, eyes wide and mouths hanging open in adulation, intoxicated with worship. They were hers to command now. If she told them to cut their own throats, they would. Suddenly Grendel realized that Moghedien was no longer embracing the source. This much compulsion might have shocked her into letting go. The servants by the door had not moved, of course. Now, she said a touch breathlessly, you will answer my questions. She had a number, including who was this Moradin fellow, if there was such a man, and where had Sindain come from, but one piqued her more than the rest. What did you hope to gain by this, Moghedien? I may decide to knot those webs on you. You can pay for your game by serving me. No, please, Moghedien groaned, wringing her hands. She actually began to weep. You will kill us all. Please, you must serve the nameless. That is what we came for, to bring you to Moradin's service. The silver-haired little woman's face was a shadowed mask of terror in the pale light, her bosom heaving as she gulped breath. Suddenly uneasy, Grendel opened her mouth. This made less and less sense by the moment. She opened her mouth, and the true source vanished. The one power vanished from her, and blackness swallowed the room again. Abruptly the caged birds broke into a frenzy of chirruping. Their wings fluttered frantically against the bamboo bars. Behind her a voice rasped like rock being ground to dust. The great lords thought you might not take their word, Grendel. The time when you could go your own way has passed. A ball of something appeared in the mirror, a dead black globe, but a silver light filled the room. The mirrors did not shine. They seemed to dull in that light. The birds went still, silent. Somehow Grendel knew they had frozen in terror. She gaped at the murderer standing there, pale and eyeless and clothed in black deeper than the ball, but larger than any she had ever seen. It had to be the reason she could not sense the source, but that was impossible. Except, where had that strange sphere of black light come from, if not from it? She had never felt the same fear others did at a murderal's gaze, not to the same degree. Yet her hands rose on their own, and she had to snatch them down to keep from covering her face. Glancing toward Moghedien and Sindain, she flinched. They had adopted the same pose as her servants, crouching on their knees, heads to the floor toward the murderall. She had to work moisture into her mouth. "You are a messenger from the Great Lord?" Her voice was steady but weak. She had never heard of such a thing, the Great Lord sending a message by murderall, and yet Moghedien was a physical coward, but still one of the chosen, and she groveled as assiduously as the girl. And there was the light. Grendal found herself wishing her dress were not cut so low. Ridiculous, of course. Murdral's appetites for women were well known, but she was one of the... Her eyes drifted to Moghedien once more. The murdrall strode by her sinuously, seeming not to pay her any heed. Its long black cloak hung undisturbed by its movements. Aginor had thought the creatures were not quite in the world in the same way everything else was. Slightly out of phase with time and reality, he had called it, whatever that meant. "I am Shaidar Haran." Stopping by her servants, the murdrall bent to grip them by the backs of their necks, one hand to each. "When I speak, you may consider that you hear the voice of the Great Lord of the Dark." Those hands tightened to the surprisingly loud sound of cracking bone. The young man spasmed as he died, kicking out. The young woman merely went limp. They had been two of her prettiest. The murdrall straightened from the corpses. "I am his hand in the world, Grendal. When you stand before me, you stand before him." Grendal considered carefully, if quickly. She was afraid, an emotion she was far more used to inspiring in others, but she knew how to control her fear. While she had never commanded armies as some of the others had, she was neither a stranger to hazard nor a coward, yet this was more than a mere threat. Moghedien and Sindane still knelt with their heads to the marble floor, Moghedien actually trembling visibly. Grendal believed this murdrall, or whatever it truly was. The Great Lord was taking a more direct hand in events, as she had feared. And if he learned of her scheming with Samael, if he chose to take action, that was, betting that he did not know was a foolish wager at this point. She knelt smoothly before the murdrall. "What would you have me do?" Her voice had regained its strength. Unnecessary flexibility was not cowardice. Those who did not bend for the Great Lord were bent, or snapped in two. "Should I call you Great Master, or would you prefer another title? I would not feel comfortable addressing even the Great Lord's hand as I would him." Shockingly, the murdrall laughed. It sounded like ice crumbling. Murdrall never laughed. "You are braver than most, and wiser. Shaidar Haran will do for you, so long as you remember who I am, so long as you do not let bravery overcome your fear too far." As it issued its commands, a visit to this Moradin was first, it seemed. She would need to be on her guard against Moghedien, and perhaps Sindane also, taking revenge for her brief use of compulsion. She doubted the girl was any more forgiving than the spider. She decided to keep to herself the letter she had sent to Rodel Iturralda. Nothing she was told indicated that her actions would be displeasing to the Great Lord, and she still had to consider her own position. Moradin, whoever he was, might be nameless today, but there was always tomorrow. Bracing herself against the rocking of Arlen's coach, Cadswain moved one of the leather window curtains far enough to see out. A light rain fell on Cairn from a gray sky full of blustering clouds and rough swirling winds. Not only the sky was full of wind. Howling gusts rocked the coach more than did its forward motion. Tiny droplets stung her hand, cold as ice. If the air cooled a little more, there would be snow. She drew her woolen cloak closer. She had been pleased to find it, shoved to the bottom of her saddlebags. The air would cool. The city's steep slate roofs and stone-paved streets glistened wetly, and though the rain was not hard, few were willing to brave the strong winds. A woman guiding an ox cart with taps of a long goad moved as patiently as her ox, but most people afoot clutched cloaks tightly, hoods pulled down, and stepped quickly as the bearers of a sedan chair rushed by. its stiff con fluttering. Others beside the woman and her ox saw no reason for haste, though. In the middle of the street, a towering Aiel man stood gaping at the sky in disbelief while the drizzle soaked him, so absorbed that a daring cutpurse sliced away his belt pouch and darted off unnoticed by his victim. A woman whose elaborately curled, high-piled hair marked her as noble walked along slowly, her cloak flapping wildly, and its long hood as well. This might have been the first time ever that she had actually walked in the streets, but she was laughing as the rain slicked her cheeks. From the doorway of a perfumer's shop, the shopkeeper stared out disconsolately. She would do little business today. Most of the hawkers had vanished for the same reason, but a handful still hopefully cried hot tea and meat pies from barrows beneath makeshift awnings. Though anyone who bought a meat pie in the street these days deserved the bellyache she would get. A pair of starving dogs ran out from an alley, stiff-legged and hackles up, barking and snarling at the coach. Cadswain let the curtain fall. Dogs seemed to know women who could channel as easily as cats did, but dogs appeared to think the women were cats, if unnaturally large ones. The pair of women seated across from her were still in conversation. "Forgive me," Daigyan was saying, "but the logic is inescapable." She ducked her head apologetically, making the moonstone dangling on a fine silver chain from her long black hair sway across her forehead. Her fingers plucked the white slashes in her dark skirts, and she spoke rapidly, as though afraid of being interrupted. "If you accept that the lingering heat was the Dark One's work, the change must be by some other agency. He would not have relented. You might say that he has decided to freeze or drown the world instead of baking it, but why? Had the heat continued through spring, the dead might well have outnumbered the living, no different than if snow falls into the summer. Therefore, logically, some other hand is at work." The plump woman's diffidence was trying at times, but as always, Catswain found her logic impeccable. She just wished she knew whose hand and to what end. "Peace," Kumira muttered. "I would rather an ounce of hard proof than 100 weight of your white Aja logic." She was brown herself, though little given to their usual failings. A handsome woman with short-cut hair, she was hard-headed and practical, a keen observer, and never lost herself so deeply in thought that she lost sight of the world around her as well. No sooner had Kumira spoken than she patted Daigyan's knee with a graceful hand and gave a smile that changed her blue eyes from sharp to warm. Shinarans were a polite people, by and large, and Kumira took care not to offend. By accident, at least. "Put your mind to what we can do about the sisters held by the Aiel. I know you'll reason out something, if anyone can." Cadswain snorted. "They deserve whatever happens to them." She had not been allowed near the Aiel tents herself, nor had any of her companions, but some of the fools who had sworn fealty to the Althor boy had ventured out to the sprawling encampment and come back white-faced and torn between outrage and sicking up. Normally, she also would have been furious over the affront to Aes Sedai dignity, whatever the circumstances. Not now. To achieve her goal, she would have run the entire White Tower through the streets naked. How could she concern herself with the discomfort of women who might have ruined everything? Humira opened her mouth to protest, despite knowing her feelings, but Cadswain went on, calm yet relentless. "Perhaps they'll weep enough to atone for the dog's dinner they made of matters, but I doubt it. They are out of our hands, and if they were in mine, I might just give them to the Aiel. Forget them, Daigyan, and put that fine mind of yours on the track I set you." The Kyrianan woman's pale cheeks flushed red at this compliment. Thank the light she was not this way except with other sisters. Humira sat silently, very smooth-faced, her hands in her lap. She might be subdued now, but little could subdue Kumira for long. They were exactly the pair Cadswain wanted with her today. The coach tilted as the team started up the long ramp leading to the Sun Palace. "Remember what I told you," she told the other two firmly, "and have a care." They murmured that they would, as well they might, and she nodded. If need demanded, she would use them both for mulch, and others too, but she did not intend to lose either because they grew careless. There was no bother or delay in letting the coach through the palace gates. The guards recognized Ireland's sigil on the doors, and they knew who would be riding inside. That coach had been to the palace often enough in the past week. The moment the horses halted, an anxious-eyed footman in unadorned black opened the coach door, holding out a broad, flat parasol of dark oiled cloth. Rain dripped from the edge onto his bare head, but then it was not intended for his shelter. Quickly touching the ornaments dangling from the bun atop her head to be sure they were all there. She had never lost one, but that was because she was careful of them. Cadsuane gathered the handles of her square wicker sewing basket from beneath her seat and stepped down. Half a dozen footmen stood waiting behind the first, parasols at the ready. So many passengers would have crowded the coach beyond comfort, but the footmen were not about to be caught short, and the extra did not hurry away until it was plain enough there were only the three of them. Obviously the coach had been seen coming. Dark-garbed serving men and women made a neat array on the deep blue and gold tiles of the great entry hall, with its square vaulted ceiling 5 spans high. They leaped forward, taking cloaks, offering small warm linen towels in case anyone needed to dry face or hands, proffering seafolk porcelain goblets of mulled wine that gave off a heady scent of spices. A winter drink, yet the sudden drop in temperature made it suitable. And after all, it was winter. Finally. 3 Aes Sedai stood waiting to one side among the massive square columns of dark marble, in front of tall, pale friezes depicting battles, no doubt important to Cairhien, but Cadsuane ignored the women for the time being. One of the young serving men had a small red and gold figure embroidered on the left breast of his coat, what people were calling a dragon.
Hey,
Corgaida,
just
the
chilling. How you
grave-faced,
doing?
gray-haired woman who ordered the servants in the Sun Palace, wore no ornament, save for the large ring of heavy keys at her waist.
How
Nor
you
did
been
anyone
doing?
else
Just
have any
chilling.
decoration on their clothes, and despite the young man's apparent enthusiasm, it was Corgaida, the holder of the keys, who would set the mood among the servants. Still, she had allowed the young fellow his embroidery, a point to remember. Cadsuane spoke to her quietly, asking after a room where she might work her embroidery hoop undisturbed, and the woman did not blink at the request. But then, doubtless, she had heard stranger serving in this place. As the servants, with the cloaks and trays, bowed and curtsied themselves off, Cadsuane finally turned to the 3 sisters
Right,
among the
definitely been a
columns.
while.
They were all looking
I've
at
been
her,
okay. Can't
ignoring
complain.
Chimera and Daigian. Corgaida remained, but she stayed well back, giving the Aes Sedai privacy. I hardly expected to find you strolling about at your ease, Cadsuane said. I thought the Aiel worked their
How you
apprentices
been
hard.
doing?
Feldrin barely reacted, merely a slight jerk of her head that softly rattled the colored beads in her thin braids, but Mirana colored with embarrassment,
We
and her
got a
hands
turkey
clenched in
already.
her
Well, it's
skirts.
been thawing out,
Events
but
had
we can be
shaken
doing a
Mirana
turkey.
so deeply that Cadsuane was unsure she would ever recover. Vera, of course, was very nearly
Most
unflappable.
hated did
Most of us were given a free
a
day because of
smoked
the
ham a
rain,
couple days
Vera
ago.
replied calmly.
It was could be
A
for
sturdy woman in plain
Thanksgiving,
wool,
but it thawed
fine
out
and
a
well
lot
cut,
quicker
but
than
decidedly plain.
the
You might have
turkey
thought her
did, so
more at
we
home
ended up
on a
having to do
farm
that
than
one
in a
earlier.
palace. You might, if you were a fool. Vera had a keen mind, a strong will, and Cadsuane did not
Oh, we're
believe
gonna
she
have
ever made the
tamales.
same
Our
mistake
mom has
twice. Like most sisters, she had not
did the
entirely gotten
tamales
over
already,
meeting
so
Cadsuane Melidrin, alive and in the flesh. Yet she did not let awe
yeah,
rule
I've been
her.
seeing that they've been
After only the
having
slightest
turkey.
of deep breaths, she went on.
They're like 60
I cannot
bucks
understand why you
if you
keep
buy them
coming
at the
back,
store and they're
Cadsuane.
delivered. They're supposed to be like
Clearly you
100
want
bucks or
something
some
from us,
crazy shit like
but
that.
unless you tell us what it is, we cannot help you. We know what you did for the Lord Dragon. She stumbled a little over the title. They still were not quite sure what to call the boy. But it's obvious you came to Cairhien because of him, and until you tell us why and what you intend, you must understand that you'll find no aid from us. Feldrin, another green, gave a start at Bera's bold tone, but she was
Excuse
nodding
me.
agreement before Bera finished. You must understand this, too, Mirana added, her serenity regained. If we decide we must oppose you, we will. Bera's face did not change, but Feldrin's mouth tightened briefly. Perhaps she
Right,
disagreed,
definitely
and
is.
perhaps she did not want to reveal too much. Cadswain favored them with a thin smile. Tell them why and what, if they decided. So far they had managed to stuff themselves into young Althor's saddlebags tied hand and foot, even Bera. Small recommendation for letting them decide so much as what to wear in the morning. I did not come to see you, she said, though I suppose Komira and Daigyan would enjoy a visit since you have a free day. You will excuse me. Motioning Korgaida to lead on, she followed the woman across the entry hall. She only glanced back once. Bera and the others had already gathered up Kumira and Daigyan and were hustling them away, but hardly like welcome guests. More like herded geese. Cadswain smiled. Most sisters considered Daigyan little better than a wilder, and treated her little better than a servant. In that company, Kumira hardly stood much higher. The most suspicious could not think they were there to try to convince anyone of anything. So Daigyan would pour the tea and sit quietly except when addressed, and apply her excellent mind to everything she heard. Kumira would let everyone except Daigyan speak before her, and sort and file away every word, every gesture and grimace. Vera and the rest would keep their oaths to the boy, of course, that went without saying. But how assiduously was another question. Even Marana might be unwilling to go too far beyond bare obedience. That was bad enough, yet it left considerable room for them to maneuver, or be maneuvered. Dark-liveried servants hurrying at their tasks along the broad, tapestry-hung hallways darted aside for Cadswain and Korgaida, and the two of them progressed to a flurry of deep bows and curtsies made over baskets and trays and armloads
Just
of
my
towels.
brother, because mainly we
From
only
the way
have
eyes watched
one
Korgaida,
copy.
Cadswain suspected the deference was as much for the holder of the
But I've been
keys
playing,
as for an Aes Sedai. There were a few Aiel about too,
whatchamacallit,
huge men like
the new Dragon
cold-eyed
Age,
lions,
the
and women
Velgar.
like colder-eyed leopards. Some of those gazes followed her icily enough to bring on the snow threatened by the rain outside, but other Aiel nodded to her gravely, and here and there one of the fierce-eyed women went so far as to smile. She had never claimed to be
But I've been
responsible for saving their
a Dragon
Karakai,
Age fan
but
since,
tales become
I
twisted
think it
in
was
retelling,
PS2,
and the
PS3,
belief granted her more
with
respect
the
than any
first
other
one.
sister, and certainly more freedom of movement around the palace.
I like it.
She wondered how they would
It all
feel if
depends
they
what type
knew
of
that
game
had
you
she
like.
had the boy in front of her right then, she would have been
Because
hard-pressed to
Dragon
stop
Age is
herself from blistering his hide for him.
RPG,
Barely more than a week since he nearly got himself
fantasy
killed,
RPG, I
and
guess you
not
would
only had
call
he
it.
managed to elude her completely, he'd
Like I
made
said,
her
I like
task
it, but
even
I've been
more
playing
difficult.
Dragon Age
If
since
half what she heard was
Dragon
true,
Age 1
a pity he
Origins.
had not been raised in Farmadding. But then
So
that
I've been
might have
playing
led
it
to
for a
its
little
own
bit.
catastrophe. The room
Because when
Korgaida
it
took her
first
to
came
was
out,
comfortably warm, with
well,
fires
not when it
blazing in
first came
marble
out, when I first
fireplaces
started
at
playing
either
it,
end
my
of the chamber,
brother,
and lamps lit,
most hated
mirrored
grower,
flames in
had
glass towers that chased the
a
day's
copy.
gloom.
He said
Plainly,
that,
Korgaida had sent orders ahead to prepare while she was waiting in the entry hall.
excuse me,
A serving woman
he
appeared
said,
almost as soon as they, with both hot tea and spiced wine on a tray,
that
and
he didn't
small
really
cakes
care for it
glazed
too
with
much,
honey.
but
Will there be anything else, Aes Sedai? Korgaida
he
asked,
thought I might
as
like it,
Cadswain set her
and I
sewing
ended up
basket beside the
putting a
tray,
lot of hours
on a
in, and
table
I
with
actually
edge and
completed the
legs
game,
thickly gilded.
beat it, with
Rigidly
expansions.
carved,
So I
too,
did
as was the
Dragon
wide
Age Origins
cornice,
and then
also
Dragon
covered
Age
with gilt.
Awakenings.
Cadswain always felt she was in a golden fish weir when she visited Cairn. Despite the light and warmth inside, rain
I don't
dripping
know, I guess you
outside
could
the
say
tall,
that.
narrow windows and the
I
gray
wouldn't
sky
consider myself
outside
that,
heightened
but
the sensation. The tea will do nicely, she said. If you will, tell Alana Mosvani that I want to see her. Tell her without delay. Korgaida's keys jingled as she curtsied, murmuring respectfully that she would find Alana Aes Sedai herself. Her grave expression never altered as she left. Very likely she was examining the request for subtleties. Cadswain preferred to be direct, when possible. She had tripped
okay,
up any
hell
number
yeah.
of clever people who had not believed she meant exactly what she said.
I got the old part
Opening
now.
the lid of her sewing basket, she took out her embroidery hoop with a less
As
than
far as
half-done piece of work
OG,
wrapped around it.
I'm
The
definitely
basket had
original.
pockets woven inside to hold items that had nothing to do with sewing. Her ivory hand mirror and hairbrush and comb, a pen case and tightly stoppered ink bottle, a number of things that she had found useful to have at hand over the years, including some that would have surprised anyone with nerve enough to search the basket. Not that she often left it out of her sight. Setting the polished silver thread box carefully on the table, she selected the skeins she needed and sat with her back to the door. The major image on her piece of embroidery was finished, a man's hand clutching the ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai. Cracks ran across the black and white disc, and there was no telling whether the hand was trying to hold it together or crush it. She knew what she intended, but time would tell what was truth. Threading a needle, she set to work on one of the surrounding images, a bright red rose. Roses and starblaze and sunburst alternated with daisies and heartsplush and snowcap, all separated by bands of stark nettles and long thorned briars. It would be a disturbing piece when completed. Before she had finished half a petal on the rose, a flash of motion reflected on the flat lid of the thread box caught her eye. It had been carefully placed to reflect the doorway. She did not raise her head from the hoop. Alana stood there glaring at her back. Cadsuane continued the slow work of her needle, but she watched that reflection from the corner of her eye. Twice Alana half turned as if to go, then finally drew herself up, visibly steeling herself. "Come in, Alana." Still not raising her head, Cadsuane pointed to a spot in front of her. "Stand there." She smiled wryly as Alana jumped. There were advantages to being a legend. People seldom noticed the obvious when dealing with a legend. Alana stalked into the room in a swish of silk skirts and took the place Cadsuane had indicated, but there was a sulky twist to her mouth. "Why do you persist in
I don't
badgering
know.
me?" she demanded.
I
"I
like
cannot tell you
provided
any more
music,
than I
so
have, and if I
I've
could,
heard
I don't
some
know
of
that I
it.
would. He belongs to—"
I've
She
heard
cut off abruptly,
a lot of that.
biting her lower
As
lip.
far as that
But she
type of
might as
music
well have
goes,
finished.
the one I
The
really
Althor
have
boy
heard
belonged to her warder.
is that
She had the gall to think
Prayers
that.
dude. I've heard his.
"I
As
have
far
kept
as
her
that type of
crying
music
to
goes,
myself," Cadsuane said quietly, "but only because I saw no reason to complicate matters." Lifting her eyes to the other woman, she kept her voice soft. "If you think that means I won't core you like a cabbage, think again." Alana
I've listened to
stiffened.
everything from
The light of
classical
Saidar
like
suddenly shone
Beethoven,
around her.
Bach, Mozart.
"If you want to be truly foolish." Cadsuane smiled, a
All the way
cold
to
smile.
country to
She made no move to
different
embrace the
variety.
source herself.
I
One
definitely
of her
have
dangling hair ornaments,
a variety of
intertwined
music
golden
that I'd
crescents,
like and
was
listen
cool on
to.
her temple. "You keep a whole hide at present, but my sufferance is not infinite. In fact, it dangles by a thread."
Hell yeah.
Alana struggled with herself, unconsciously smoothing blue silk. Abruptly, the glow of the power winked out, and she turned her head away from Cadsuane so swiftly that her long black hair swung. "I don't know any more to tell." The sullen words rushed out of her breathily. "He was injured and then not, but I don't think a sister healed him. The wounds no one could heal are still there. He leaps about, traveling, but he's still in the south. Somewhere in Ilion, I think, but at this distance he could be in Tyr for all I know. He's full of rage and pain and suspicion.
Hell
There
yeah,
isn't any
definitely be
more,
careful up
Cadsuane.
in that area.
There isn't."
A lot of
Careful as the
craziness
silver
happens up in
pitcher
that
flute,
area at night.
Cadsuane poured a cup of tea, testing the thin green
Especially
porcelain
depending on
cup
what
for
part of
warmth.
Hollywood you could be at.
As might have been expected in silver, the tea had cooled quickly. Channeling briefly, she heated it again. The dark tea tasted too much of mint. Kyrianan used mint entirely too freely, in her opinion. She did not offer a cup to Alana. Traveling. How could the boy have rediscovered what had been lost to the White Tower since the breaking? "You will keep me fully informed, however, won't you, Alana?"
Yeah.
That was not a question.
I heard that
"Look at me,
about
woman.
how it's been recently up
If
in
you
that area.
dream of him, I want every detail." Unshed tears glistened in Alana's eyes.
Alright.
"In my place, you would have done the same." Cadsuane scowled over the cup at her. She might have. There was no difference between what Alana had done and a man forcing himself on a woman, but the light helper she might have, had she believed it would help her reach her goal.
Huh.
Now she no longer considered even making Alana pass the
The
bond to
Viper
her.
room. Oh shit.
Alana had
That's
proved how
crazy.
useless that was in controlling him. Do
And
not keep me
I
waiting,
never really
Alana,
stayed up
she
and much
said
in
in
that
an icy
area
tone.
whenever I was up
She
there. I
had
was
no
mainly
sympathy
in
for the other woman.
Venice
Alana was another in a line of sisters
or
from
go with a couple
Lorraine to
buddies
Elida who
when
had
they went up
bungled and
to
worsened what they should have been mending, while she
East LA.
herself had been off chasing first Logain Ablar and then Masrim
But
Taim,
I
which
got
did not
kicked out of
soothe her mood.
Hollywood. They didn't like
I
me
will
up
keep
there.
you fully informed, Alana sighed,
I kept getting
pouting
run
like a
off by
girl.
the cops no matter
Katswain
where I
itched
went
to
in
slap
Hollywood.
her.
They were all me and
Alana had worn the shawl
my
almost
friends.
40 years. She should have grown up more than this. Of course, she was Arafellan. In Farmatting, few girls of 20 sulked and pouted as much as an Arafellan could on her aged deathbed.
I was like
Abruptly, Alana's
right on
eyes
the
widened
boardwalk.
in alarm, and Katswain saw another face reflected in the
I don't know. I don't know about
box.
Melrose. I know I was right on the
Setting the cup
boardwalk
back
because
on the
we just
tray
hopped off
and
the
her
train.
embroidery hoop on the table, Katswain stood
We
and turned
hopped
to the
off
door.
this
She
the
did not
train,
hurry, but she did not
came
dally or
up,
play
and
games
once
as
we
she
came
had
up
with
out of the
Alana
building
either.
was
Are you done with her,
the
Aes Sedai?
boardwalk. Well, that's what the
Sorellia
boardwalk,
asked,
but where all
stepping
the
into the
stars
room.
are and all
The
that.
leathery, white-haired wise one spoke
So
to
I'm not sure the
Katswain,
exact area.
but her
All I
eyes
know is
remained on Alana.
it's called
Ivory and gold
the Bit
clicked
Patrol or
softly at
Pit
her
Patrol,
wrists
whatever
as
they
she
want to call
planted
it. But it's
hands on her hips,
all
and
the
her dark
cops in that
shawl
area that
slid to
run
her
out
elbows.
the
When Katswain
undesirables,
said that she was indeed done,
and that's what me and my
Sorellia
friends were
gestured quickly to
considered.
Alana, who stalked from the room.
I'm not
Flounced
sure
might have
everybody's
been a better
Chinese
word,
theater.
with sullen
I know it was
irritation
in
on her face.
walking
Sorellia
distance
frowned
to
after her.
In-N-Out
Katswain had
Burger.
encountered the woman before, and interesting encounters they had been, if brief. She had not met many people she considered formidable, but Sorellia was one, perhaps even a match for herself in some ways.
They didn't like
She also suspected the woman was as old as she was,
dirty punk
maybe
rockers up
older,
in that area,
and
the hop
that she had
trains.
never
They
expected to
didn't like the
find.
traveling folk.
No sooner had Alana vanished than Kiruna appeared in the doorway, kicking gray silk skirts in her hurry and peering down the
Oh,
hall
is
in
it?
the direction
I
Alana
know
had
that.
gone,
I remember
and
getting off
carrying an
the,
intricately worked
I guess
golden tray that held an
underground
even
train,
more
the
elaborate
subway,
golden pitcher
coming
with a
out of the
high
building,
neck, and,
the
incongruously,
the
two
stars
small
and all
white
that being
glazed
right
pottery
there.
cups.
And then
Why
the
is Alana running? She
cop
said.
or the pit
I would
patrol,
have
the
been
cops,
faster, Sorellia, but
they ran me and my
she saw
friends off
Katswain
because,
again, and her
like I
cheeks
said,
went the
with dirty
deepest
punk rockers
possible
that
crimson.
that
Embarrassment
hop
looked quite
trains,
odd on the
they
statuesque woman.
call us
Put the
gutter
tray on the
punks.
table, girl,
But they ran
Sorellia
us off
said,
the
and
boardwalk.
go to Chalin.
And then we went,
She will be waiting to give you your
I
lessons.
think it was an In-N-Out Burger.
Stiffly,
And we were
Kiruna set her
actually eating
burden down, avoiding Katswain's eyes.
some
As she
fries that
turned
we
to go,
scored out
Sorellia caught her
of the
chin in
trash
sinewy fingers.
from there. And
You
we're
have
munching on them
begun to make a
fries.
true effort, girl, the
And then
wise
they
one
roll
told
up on
her
the same
friends.
ones.
If
Roll
you
up on us
continue, you will
again.
do very well.
And we told them, like, well, you
Very
told us to get out of that part.
Now go. Chalin is not
It's
as
like, no,
patient as
they
I.
they straight up told us,
Sorellia waved toward the
no,
corridor,
that to
but
pretty much
Kiruna
get the
stood
fuck out of
staring at her for
Hollywood.
a long moment,
Because we
a
told them, like, well,
strange
where do you
expression
want
on
us to
her
go?
face.
Where else are we supposed to
If
go?
Katswain had had to make a wager,
And the
she would have
cop
called
straight up
Kiruna
said, like,
pleased at the
I don't
praise,
care.
and
Like, just get the fuck
surprised
out of
being
Hollywood.
pleased. The white-haired woman opened her mouth, and Kiruna gave herself a shake and hurried from the room.
Oh,
A
shit.
remarkable show.
Yeah, but he straight telling us, like, I don't give a fuck where you go,
Do
just
you
get the
really
fuck out of
think she will
Hollywood.
learn your ways of weaving, Saidar? Katswain asked, hiding her incredulity.
Because we got off
Kiruna and the others had told her
the
of these
walkway
lessons,
part like they had
but many
told
of
us
the wise
originally.
one's weaves were
And
very different from those taught
like
in
I
the
said,
White
we
Tower.
just dumpster scored some
The first way you learned the
fries
weave
from
for a
In-N-Out
particular
Burger.
thing imprinted
We're
itself
munching
on
those
you.
because they're still
Learning
fucking
a
good.
second was all but
We're
impossible.
sitting there munching
And
those
even
with
when you could
it's
learn,
me and
the second learned weave
3 of my
almost
friends, so
never
it's 4
worked
of us.
nearly as
We're
well.
sitting there
That
munching.
was one reason some
Same
sisters
cops
did not
roll up.
welcome Wilders to the tower at
Yeah, and
any
they told us
age.
straight, like, we
Too
don't care where you go,
much
just get the
might have
fuck out
been
of
learned
Hollywood.
already and could not be unlearned. Sorellia shrugged. Perhaps. Learning a second way is hard enough
Right.
without all the
And what's
hand-waving
messing about
you
that
Aes
part
Sedai
is
do. The main thing
I
Kiruna
had
Wachiman must learn is that she owns
I
her
had
pride.
a weed
It
pipe
does not
that
own her.
I was smoking
She will be a
resin,
very
but the resin I
strong
got
woman
was
once she
from
learns that. Pulling a chair
Funny
around
part
to
is,
face the
it was
one
dumpster
Katswin
score
had
from a
been sitting in,
dispensary
she eyed it
from when they cleaned
doubtfully,
all their
then
pipes.
sat down.
So it was good resin.
She appeared
But
almost
I
as
had
stiff
that,
and uncomfortable as
and the
Kiruna
cop
had,
waits
but
me
she
up for a
motioned
bogus ticket
authoritatively
saying
for
I had
Katswin to
concentrated
sit.
hash,
A strong-willed woman
throws me in
used to command.
cuffs, and I get stuck
Katswin swallowed a rueful
in
chuckle as
county
she
for
took
the
a chair.
weekend just
It was
for
well to be reminded that
the
Wilders
cops,
or
or not
not,
the cops, but the
the wise
judge.
ones were
'Cause
far from ignorant
I told the judge what it
savages.
was. Like, it's a weed
Of
pipe
course
and
they would know the difficulties.
it's a ball of resin.
As for hand-waving,
I'm smoking resin.
few had channeled where she could see,
The
but
judge
she had
throws
noticed that they created some weaves
just
without the
throws the case
gestures
out,
that sisters used.
dismisses
The
it.
hand movements were not truly
So
part
I
of
end
the
up
weave, but in a way they
another
were,
weekend, trying
because
up a
they had
weekend
been
in
part
fucking
of
county
learning the weave.
because of that
Perhaps
bullshit.
once there had been Aes Sedai who could, say,
All
hurl a
because
ball
the
of fire without some
cop
sort
wanted to
of
be a
throwing
dick.
motion, but if so, they were long dead, and their teachings with them. Today, some things just could not be done
Yeah,
without
but he
the
said I had a
appropriate gestures.
concentrated ball of
There were
hash,
sisters who claimed they could tell who had
which I
taught
don't know
another
why that
sister
would
by
be
which
illegal to
motions she
begin with,
used
since
for
it's
which
still
weaves.
THC.
Teaching any of our new apprentices anything has been difficult at best, Soralia went on. I do not speak to offend,
No,
but you Aes Sedai give oath, it
me
seems,
being
and
who I am,
immediately
I have
try
a
to
mouth
find a
on
way
me.
around it.
They ended up
Alana
putting
must
me,
find this particularly difficult.
I was in a hole for the
Suddenly, her
weekend,
clear
pretty
green
much.
eyes were very sharp on Katswain's face.
Cause I was talking
How
shit
can
the
we
whole
punish
time
her willful failings if it means harming the
since they wrote me up the
Karakar?
way they wrote it up the way they did.
Katswain folded her
I was talking
hands in
shit
her
the whole
lap.
time, so I
Masking surprise was not
ended
easy.
up in a hole for the
So much
weekend
for the secret of
until
Alana's
court.
crime. But why had the woman let her know that she knew? Perhaps one revelation called for another.
Because
The bond does not work in that fashion, she
what
said.
can I say?
If you kill her, he will die then
I
or
talk
soon
shit
after.
and I give them
Short
shit
of
and
that, he will be aware of
they
what
don't like
happens
you when you
to
give
her,
them
but he
attitude.
will not really feel it. As far away as he is now, he will only be vaguely aware at that. Soralia nodded
And the
slowly.
way I talk shit to
Her
them,
fingers touched the golden tray
they
on
can
the table, then came
they
away.
labeled me as
Her expression was as hard to
a threat
read as
to
the
the
face of a
security of
statue,
the staff
but
members in the
Katswain
facility.
suspected that Alana would find an unpleasant surprise the next time she let her temper flare, or threw one of her
I come out with some off the
salts.
wall shit.
That was unimportant, though. Only the boy was important. Most men will take what is offered if it seems attractive and pleasant, Soralia
Right?
said.
I
Once
never
we
minded
thought of
being locked
Randall
in a
Thor,
hole,
so.
but
Unfortunately, it is too late
I
to
think that
change
came
the
from
path we
whenever
walk.
I was
Now
in
he
prison.
suspects whatever is
I
offered
ended up
freely.
getting in trouble
Now, if I wanted him to accept
there, and
something, I would
I
pretend
got
I
locked
did
in the
not
hole
want him to
for
have it. If I wanted to
2.5
stay close to him, I
years
would
and moved
pretend
to a
indifference to
completely
whether I
different
ever saw him
prison.
again. Once more, those
So
eyes
being locked up
focused
in a
on
hole for
Katswain, green augurs,
2.5
not
years,
trying to see
a
what
little
lay
bit in the
inside
hole
her
don't
head.
bother me.
The woman knew. Some, at least. Enough, or too much. Still, Katswain felt a rising thrill of possibility. If she had had any doubts that Soralia wanted to feel
Well, I
her
guess
out,
yeah,
they were gone.
but
And you did not
here
feel out someone in this
in
manner unless you
in
hoped
my
for some
state, it's
agreement.
just
Do you
it
believe a man
becomes
must be
administrative
hard?
sag or pretty
She
much the
asked.
shoe.
She was taking a chance. Or strong?
Secure housing
By her
unit because I was
tone, she
walking
left no
around the
doubt
yellow,
she
which
saw a
here
difference.
it's high security.
Again, Soralia
So I was
touched the
considered
tray. The
a
smallest of
threat
smiles might have quirked
to
her
the
lips for an
facility and the
instant.
staff members
Or
when
not.
I got locked up, when I got in
Most
trouble in
men
the
see the
hole
two as
or in
one and the
prison.
same, Katswain
That's
maligned
why they
them.
moved me to a whole nother
Strong
prison.
endures. Hard
But it's
shatters.
single celled, so
Katswain drew
I didn't
breath.
have I didn't have
A
to
chance
I
she
didn't
would
have a
have
celling.
scoured anyone else for
But yeah, it was
taking. But she was not
23
anyone else, and
a day, or
sometimes
locked down
chances had to be
23 hours a
taken.
day, and
The boy
I had a
confuses them,
shower
she said.
every other
He
day.
needs to
So
be strong and
showers
makes
was
himself harder.
Mondays,
Too
Wednesdays, and
hard
Fridays.
already, and he will
Where's your
not
shower
stop
days?
until he is stopped.
Unless you took a
He has
bird bath.
forgotten how to laugh except in bitterness. There are no tears left in him. Unless he finds laughter and tears again, the world faces disaster. He must learn that even the dragon reborn is
But
flesh.
here,
If he goes
at
to
least in my
Tarn Garden
state,
as he is, even his victory may be as dark as his defeat. Soralia listened intently and kept silent even after Katswain finished. Those green eyes studied her.
I never really
Your
flooded
dragon
whenever I was
reborn
in
and
there.
your last battle are not in our prophecies, Soralia said at last. We have tried to make Randall Thor know his blood, but I fear he sees us as only
But at
another
least
spear.
in the state I'm
If one
in,
spear breaks in your
after
hand,
your
you do not
your
pause
first
to
year
mourn before
being
taking up another.
locked down like
Perhaps
that,
you and I aim at targets
if you
not too
have
far
a
apart.
TV in your property,
Perhaps we do, Cadswain said
by
cautiously.
law they have to
Targets
give you
even a
that
hand
TV.
apart might be not at all alike.
It was
Abruptly, the glow of
some
Saigar surrounded the
of our
leather-faced
rights that
woman.
were written
She
in the
was weak
books
enough to make
after
Gaian look at least
the
moderately
riot that
strong,
happened in Santa
but then
Fe.
Sorelia's
After
strength
that,
did not lie in the power.
as part
There
of
is
all
a
that
thing you
of
may
the riot,
find useful,
we
she
got
said.
certain rights
I
that we didn't
cannot
have
make it
before.
work, but I can weave the flows to show you. She did just
Right?
that,
I'm still
laying
here.
feeble skeins that fell into
But yeah, I
place
ended
and
up
melted,
after the first
too
year, I ended
poor
up
to
getting
do
my
what they
TV.
were intended for. It is called traveling, Sorelia said. This time, Cadswain's jaw
Me too.
dropped.
I learned my first
Alana and
time.
Kiruna and the rest denied teaching the wise ones how to link, or a number of
Me,
other
it's weed
skills they
and
suddenly
being able
seemed
to do
to
what the
have,
fuck I want.
and
You're
Cadswain
not
had
being told
assumed
what
the
to do.
ideal had managed to wring them out of the sisters held in
But
the
my
tents.
first time,
But this was
it cost
impossible,
me
she would have said. Yet she did not
7
believe
years.
Sorelia was lying.
And
She could
after
hardly
that,
wait to try the move
I
herself.
stayed out of trouble.
Not that it was of much use immediately.
I've been out
Even if she knew
long enough
exactly where the
now
wretched boy was, she had to make him come to her.
that I could petition for
A very great
my
gift,
rights back for
she
my
said
felonies
slowly.
off my record.
I have
It's been
nothing
well
I can give you to compare.
over the time.
This time there was no doubt
fact,
of the brief smile that flashed across Sorelia's lips.
Next
She knew
year,
very well that Cadswain
when
was
we
in her
hit
debt.
2025,
Taking up the heavy golden pitcher with both hands,
it will
she carefully
be
filled the small white cups
20 years
with
that I've
plain
been out.
water.
It's
She
been
did not
19 years
spill
that
a
I've been
drop.
out now.
I
When I got
offer you
released, I
Waterloo,
discharged,
she
no
said
probation,
solemnly,
no
picking up
parole.
one of the
I
cups.
did my
By this
parole in
we are
there.
bound as one
But I
to
got out
teach
in
Randall Thor laughter and tears.
2005,
She sipped, and Cadswain
and I
imitated
haven't gotten in
her.
trouble since. So
We are bound as one.
I've been out well long
And
enough
if their
to
targets turned out not to be the
petition
same at
to
all,
get my
she
rights
did not
back and my
underestimate
felonies off my
Sorelia as
record.
ally or opponent.
Well over
But
the time.
Cadswain knew which target had to be struck, at any cost.
Chapter 13. Floating like snow. The northern horizon was purple with the fierce rain
Oh
that
yeah,
hammered the
not
east
me.
of Ilion
I
through
saw
the
that
night.
when I was in there.
Overhead, a morning sky
People
of dark
getting
bordering
out and
clouds threatened.
I see
as
him a week
strong
fucking
winds
later.
flung cloaks about, made banners snap and
Or
crack like
sometimes
whips
there's
on
one
the crest
time it
of
was
the
less
ridge.
than a week later.
The white dragon banner and the crimson
Yeah, I
banner
see him
of
a
light,
week later,
bright
or a
standards
month
of
later
nobility
down
from
the road,
Ilion and Carrion
or I
and
eventually
Tyr.
see him again down the road.
The nobles kept to their own
Or,
kind,
well,
three widely spaced
as
knots
time
awash
went
in
by,
gilt and
I'd see
silver-plated
him
steel,
again.
silks and velvets and laces, but in common they looked around uneasily.
All right.
Even the best trained of their horses tossed heads and stamped hooves on the muddy ground. The wind was cold and colder seeming, for the heat it had replaced so abruptly, just as the rain had been a shock after so long without. From whatever nation they had prayed for the baking drought to break, but none knew what to make of unrelenting storms in answer to their prayers. Some glanced at Rand
But
when
even
they
when
thought
I
he would
got
not
out,
notice, perhaps
'cause
wondering if he had answered them so.
they take you past the
The thought
gate
made him
and
laugh softly, bitterly.
drive you all night and
He
whatnot.
patted his
But
black gelding's
it's like
neck
when
with
we're
a leather
leaving,
gauntleted hand, glad that
because they all
Taishar
knew
did
me there,
not show
because I've been there
nerves.
for a while. And
The massive animal might have
what
been
can I
a
say? I'm a
statue,
hard person
awaiting
to
the pressure
forget
of
just
reins
because
or knees
how
to
I
move.
am. But
It
when
was
we're
good that the
leaving,
dragon
one of
reborn's
the
horse
patrol
seemed
ones
as cold
that
as he
drive
did,
around the
as
prison
though they
in a
flew
van,
convoyed together.
with like
Even with
their
the one
too much
power raging through
patrol
him,
security,
fire
I
and
guess.
ice and death,
I was
he was
talking to
barely
them
aware
in
of
there,
within,
while
but flailed his
as I
gold
told them I'm
embroidered cloak
leaving, like
about and cut
them
through his
getting
coat,
out and whatnot.
green silk
And
thickly
they said
worked
the
with
same
gold,
thing, like, don't come back.
not intended
Like,
for wear
you're
in
good
such
up
weather.
there. I
The
told, like,
wounds in
man,
his side ached and
like,
throbbed.
I ain't coming
Behold,
back,
and the
man.
new
Like,
cutting across
this
it.
is my first
The
and last
wounds that would
time, bro.
never
It's like,
heal,
you're not gonna
but
see
that was
me
distant
again.
too. Another
And
man's
he
flesh.
kind of like thought
The
about it,
crown
like
of swords
kind of
might
like
have been pricking
nodded
someone
and
else's
said,
temples with the sharp points
you
of
know
the tiny
what?
blades
Out of all
among
the
its
people
golden
that's
laurel
told me
leaves.
that,
Even the filth
out of
woven
all the
through
people that's told me
Sayadin
that,
seemed less
you're the one
obtrusive
that,
than it once
out of
had.
all of them, like,
Still
I actually
vile,
believe you.
still loathsome,
Yeah.
but no longer worth notice.
And I felt good that they
The
actually
noble's
believed
eyes
that
on
I
his
learned my
back were
lesson, that I was
palpable, though.
truthful. 'Cause, yeah,
Shifting his sword hilt, he leaned forward.
I
He
didn't
could
do
see the tight
what they
cluster
told
of
me to
low
do in
wooded
there
hills half a
for the
mile to
most
the
part,
east as
but
clearly as if he were
I
using
like my
looking
freedom. I
glass.
like being able to smoke weed
The
without
land
getting in
was flat
trouble.
here. The only
Like
prominences
staying up
those
as late as I
forested
want. Well,
hills,
I did
this
that there
long
too,
ridge
but
thrusting up from the heath.
I can't
The
live
next
stream
thicket,
and
dense enough to
meet
truly
and
deserve
talk
the
to other
name, lay
people
close to 10
online like
miles off.
this. And
Only
there,
storm-battered, half-leafless trees and tangles of undergrowth were visible on the hills, but he knew what they
right?
hid. 2, perhaps 3,000 of the men somehow
I
gathered to try to
definitely,
stop him from taking Ilion.
from when I was young,
That
'cause I
army
went,
had
I got locked up
disintegrated
when I was
once
like
they learned that the
18,
man who had summoned
19.
them was dead,
So
that Matin Stepaneus had vanished,
I had that whole
perhaps into the
mentality.
grave as well, and that there was a new king in Ilion. Many had scattered back to their homes, yet just as many clung together.
I'm 18.
Usually no
You
more
ain't
than
gonna tell me
20
what to
here,
do.
30
No.
there, but a great army if they came together, and countless armed
Yeah.
bands otherwise.
We went,
Either way, they could easily roam the countryside.
I ain't gotta listen to no
Time
one.
weighed
I'm
down on his
18.
shoulders like lead.
You can't tell me
There
what the
was
fuck
never
to do
enough
type
time, but maybe this
mentality. And
once.
yeah,
Fire and ice
it
and
led
death.
me to prison.
What would you do? He thought. Are you there? And then, doubtfully, hating the doubt,
Right? That's
were
how
you
I've been
ever
too.
there? Silence answered, deep and dead in the emptiness that surrounded him. Or was there mad
Right.
laughter somewhere in the recesses of his
Well,
mind? Did he imagine it?
it
Like the
depends.
feel of someone
I
looking
might
over his
have
shoulder? Someone just on the brink of touching his
a
back?
couple warrants in
Or the colors that
Venice.
swirled just out of sight? More than
And,
colors,
well,
and
and
were gone.
Venice and other part of LA,
A
but
thing of madmen. His gloved thumb slid along the carvings that serpentined the dragon
I
scepter.
don't know.
The
But that
long
was
green and white
back in
tassels below the polished spear point
09, I
fluttered in
think.
the wind. Fire and ice and
And
death
again,
would come.
a ticket for
I will go talk to them
Venice
myself,
Beach for
he announced,
drinking on
which
boardwalk.
produced a furor. Lord Gregorin, the green sash of the Council of Nine, slanted across his
I'm not sure how
innately gilded
misdemeanor warrants
breastplate,
are in
carried his
Cali.
fine-ankled white gelding
I really don't
forward
want to
from
go
the
to Cali and
Ilions,
try to
followed closely by Dmitri
take
Markovin,
care of it
first
because I don't
captain
want to
of the
get picked up on it
companions on a solid
because
bay.
y'all have
Markovin
that
was the
3
only man
strikes
among them without silk
law
or
up
speck
there.
of lace, the only man in
I'm way
plain,
past 3
brightly
strikes.
burnished armor, though the conical helmet resting on his
I
saddle's
don't know,
high
in
pommel
Venice.
did bear 3 thin golden
Venice
plumes.
Beach, man.
Lord Marek lifted his
I was in
reins,
Dogtown.
then let them fall uncertainly when he saw no
Yeah,
others of
but
the
drinking
nine
in
move.
Venice Beach.
A wide man
Off
with
the
a stolid
boardwalk.
manner, and new to the council, he often seemed more craftsman than lord, despite the rich silks beneath his lavish armor and the folds of lace spilling over. High Lords Wyraman and Tomeran spurred together from the Tyrans, as crusted with gold and silver
Yeah,
as any
so I
of
don't
the
want to
nine.
go over there and get picked up for
And Rosanna, newly raised to high lady and
misdemeanor.
wearing a breastplate worked with
y'all
the
having
buckling
that 3
stars of her
strikes.
house.
I'll be
There
fucked.
too, others half made as if to follow, then hung back, looking worried.
Because New
The late slender
Mexico, where I'm
Aracom
at,
and blue-eyed
we don't have
Maracan
3
and
strikes.
bald-headed Guayam
We just
were
have the
dead men.
habitual offender act
They
that you
did not
get
know that,
added
however much
time
they
onto
wanted to
your
be at the center of power,
sentence beforehand.
they feared Rand would kill them. Only Lord Samaradrid came from the Kyrianen on a gray that had seen better days, his armor battered, its gilding chipped. His face was gaunt and hard, the front of his head shaved and powdered like a common soldier, and his dark eyes shone with contempt for the taller Tyrans.
Nice.
There
Well, I
was
was there
plenty of
because
contempt to go around.
I
Tyrans and
skate,
Kyrianen
so
hated one another. Illianers and Tyrans despised each other.
that, and that's where all the
Only Kyrianen and
other
Illianers got
punk
along to any
rockers like me
degree,
hung out.
and there was a certain amount of prickle even there. Their 2 nations might not have near the long history of bad blood shared by Tyr and Ilion.
I used to be one of
Kyrianen
those
still were foreigners,
dirty kids sitting
armed
there
and
with a
armored on Ilion's
cardboard
soil,
sign.
welcomed half-heartedly at
And
best,
the funny thing
and
about
only that
that,
much because they followed Rand.
well, I'll tell y'all when I get
But
back. I
despite all the
gotta
frowning and
be
bristling
right back.
and trying to talk at once as they milled about Rand in a flurry of wind-blown cloaks, they had a common goal now, after a fashion. Majesty, Gregorin said hastily, bowing in his gold-tooled saddle.
Well,
I
there's
do
always
beg
a
you
lot
let
of
me
shit
go
goes
in
on
your
down there
stead,
to begin with.
or
I can
first
just
Captain
imagine it got
Markland.
worse.
The square-cut beard that left his upper lip bare framed a round face creased with worry. These men must know you're a king. The proclamations to be read in every village, at every crossroads, as we do speak. Yet they may no show proper respect for your crown. Lantern-jawed Marcolin, clean-shaven, studied Rand with dark, deep-set eyes, giving no hint what lay behind his impassive face. The companion's loyalty was to the crown of Ilion, and Marcolin was old enough to remember when Tam Althor had been second captain over him. But only he knew what he thought of Rand Althor as king. "My Lord Dragon," Wireman intoned as he made his bow, not waiting for Gregorin to finish. The man always intoned, and even on horseback he seemed to strut. His worked velvets and striped silks and falls of lace almost overwhelmed his armor, and his pointed gray beard gave off a flowery scent of perfumed oils. "This rabble is too petty to concern the Lord Dragon personally. Set dogs to catch dogs, I say. Let the Ilianers root them out. Burn my soul, they've done nothing so far to serve you but talk." Trust him to turn agreement with Gregorin into an insult. Tolmaran was lean enough to make Wireman appear bulky, and somber enough to dim the luster of his garb. He was no fool, and rival to Wireman besides. Yet he nodded slowly in agreement. No love lost there for Ilianers at all. Samaradrid curled a lip at the tyrants, but addressed himself to Rand, cutting in hard on Wireman's heels. "This gathering is 10 times as large as any other we have found so far, my Lord Dragon." He cared nothing for the king of
Hey,
Ilion.
Christopher, how you
Little enough
doing,
for the
bro?
Dragon Reborn,
Good to see
except
you.
that the throne of Kyrian was Rand's to
Yeah,
give.
but funny
Samaradrid
part
hoped it
about
would be given to one he could
Venice
follow instead of fight.
is
Their
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien. C'est bon de te voir.
that
Their
with me
loyalties must
being
be to Brand,
there,
or so many
holding a
would not have
sign
held
like I
together.
used to be.
I fear talking to them is a waste of time, but if you must talk, let me ring their
I'm in
position openly with steel so they know the price
countless
of putting a foot
vacation
out of line.
pictures with people.
Rosanna glared right back
People,
at
you know how they
Samaradrid.
have tourists
A
up and
lean
down the
woman,
boardwalk
not
down there in
tall,
Venice
yet
or even
nearly as
Santa
tall as he,
Monica.
with eyes like blue
But
eyes.
I think less
She did not
than
wait for him to finish
less
either,
people than Santa
and she
Monica
too
just
spoke to
'cause
Rand.
it is
"I've come too
Venice.
far and invested
Weed
too
and
much in you to
skateboarding.
see you
That's
die
what there
now
is to
for
do
nothing,"
there.
she said bluntly.
Because me holding
No
a
more
sign,
fool than Tolmaran.
people who are on
Rosanna
vacation,
had claimed a
they
place in the
go by,
councils
see
of
the
the High
sign,
Lords, though tyrant high ladies
give me
seldom
money,
did,
and then take a
and
picture
blunt
with me.
was the word for
Just me
her.
holding a sign.
Despite the armor most of the
Then they'll
noblewomen
stand
wore,
next to me,
none actually led their armsmen
like,
into battle, yet
say
Rosanna
this is a
carried a
sign.
flanged
I'm
mace
holding
on her
this
saddle.
half the sign,
Sometimes
and they're
Rand
holding
thought
the
she
other
would like
half,
a
and
chance to use
they're
it.
staring at like this,
"I doubt those Ilianers have
taking a picture with me.
proposed," she said. "And it takes
So
only one arrow to kill
I'm
even
in
the
countless
Dragon Reborn."
vacation pictures of people
Pursing his
doing
lips
that.
thoughtfully, Marcolin nodded before catching himself, then exchanged startled looks with Rosanna,
Hell yeah,
each more
just chilling.
surprised than the other to find themselves
Which
of like
I
mind
find
with an ancient
funny
enemy.
that they'd want to go on vacation and
"These peasants could never have found the mettle to
see
stay under
someone like
arms
me and
without
take a
encouragement,"
picture with
Wireman
them next
continued
holding
smoothly,
my
ignoring
exchanging
Rosanna.
sign.
He was
They'd
skilled
give me
in knowing
money
who and
because
what
they'd take
he
the
did not
picture
want
and
to see or
whatnot.
hear.
They gave me like
He was a
$10
fool.
here, sometimes
"May
20.
I
The
look
person,
to
I
these
guess.
so-called
Yeah,
9 for this horse?
they'd give me money for
I
taking my
do
picture,
protest
but
this tyrant pig's
I
insults, Majesty,"
always thought it
Gregorin
was
growled right atop him,
cool and
one hand
odd
darting
that
for his
they
sword.
want to take a picture
"I
with
do
me
protest most
with my
heartily."
sign.
"There are too many this time," Samaradrid said at the same instant. "Most will turn against you as soon as your back is to them in any case." By his pointed frown, he might have been
Ooh,
speaking of
that
the
sucks,
tyrants
just
as
chilling.
well as the men on the wooded hills.
There
Perhaps
you
he
go.
was. "Better to kill them and be done." "Did I ask for opinions?" Rand snapped harshly. Babel became silence, except for the crack of cloaks and banners flapping in the wind. Suddenly expressionless faces regarded him,
There
more
we
than
go,
one
that's
going
better.
gray. They did not know he held the power, but they knew him. Not all of what they knew was true, but it was just as well they believed. "You will come with me, Gregorin," he said in a more normal voice. Still hard, though. Steel was all they understood. Go soft, and they would turn on him. "And you, Marcolin. The rest stay here. Dashiba, Hopwell." Everyone not named reined their horses back hurriedly as the Tuashaman rode to
No,
join
I'm not
Rand.
too bad, Christopher.
The Ilianers eyed the black-coated men as though they would have liked to remain behind, too.
All right.
Aside from anything else,
It's an expensive
Colin
place to
Dashiva was
live,
glowering
too.
and muttering under his breath, as he so often did. Everyone was aware that Sayadin drove men mad sooner or later, and plain-faced Dashiva certainly looked the part, lank, untrimmed hair flying in the wind, licking his lips and shaking his head. For that matter, Ibn Hopwill, just 16 and still with a few scattered blotches on his cheeks, wore a staring frown that gazed beyond anything in sight. At least Rand knew the why of that. As the Ashaman drew near, Rand could not help cocking his head to listen, though what he listened for was inside his head. Alana was there, of course. Neither the void nor the power altered by a whisker.
Just chilling.
Distance wore that awareness down to just that. Awareness that she existed, somewhere far to the north. Yet there was something more today. Something he had felt several times recently.
Time to
dim
move on
and
to
barely on the edge of
other
notice. A whisper of shock, perhaps, or outrage. A breath of something sharp he could not quite grasp.
Oh shit, hell yeah.
She must
That
feel
would be
whatever it was
badass.
very strongly for him to be even that conscious of it at this distance. Maybe she was missing him. A wry thought. He did not miss her. Ignoring Alana was easier than it had been once. She was there, but not the voice that used to shout of death and killing whenever an Ashaman came into sight. Luz Theron was gone. Unless that feel of someone staring at the back of his head, brushing his shoulder blades with a finger, was him. Was there a madman's hoarse laughter deep in his thoughts? Or was it his own? The man had been there. He had. He became aware of Marcolin staring at him, and Gregorin trying very hard not to. Not yet, he told them wryly, and almost laughed when they clearly understood right away.
How you been
Relief
doing,
was too plain on their faces for anything else.
I see you've been doing a lot of
He was not
COD.
insane. Yet. Come, he told them, and started Tidashar down the slope at a trot. Despite the men following, he felt alone.
I know over here we're going to have
he felt empty.
Turkey plus, stuffing with
Between the ridge and the hills lay patches of thick scrub and long stretches of dead grass, a glistening mat of brown and yellow, eaten flat by the rain.
That our
Only a few days ago, the ground had been so parched that he had thought he could drink a river without changing.
Stuffing. And
then the torrents came,
that, we're going to do that with the turkey.
Finding mercy at last,
so
maybe by the dark one,
turkey
a bit
for
of black
us.
humor. He did not
we'll
know
go to our
which.
moms, and there's probably could be
now the horse's hooves splashed mud
turkey,
at every second
tamales.
Step. He hoped this did not take long. He had some time, by what Hopwell had reported, but not forever. Perhaps weeks if he was lucky. He needed months. Light he needed years he would never have. His hearing heightened by the power, he could make out some of what the men behind him were saying. Gregorin and Marcolin rode knee to knee, trying to hold their cloaks against the wind, and speaking in low tones about the men ahead, about their fears the men might fight. Neither doubted they would be crushed if they resisted, but they feared the effect on Rand, and his on Ilion, if Ilioners fought him now that Brend was dead. They still could not bring themselves to give Brend his true name, Samael. The very notion that one of the Forsaken had ruled in Ilion frightened them, even more than the fact that the Dragon Reborn ruled there now. Dashiva, slumped in his gray's saddle like a man who had never seen a horse before, muttered angrily under his breath, in the old tongue, which he spoke is a scholar. Brand knew a little, but not enough to understand what the fellow was mumbling. Probably about the weather.
It was good.
Despite being a farmer, Dashiva disliked being out of doors unless the skies were clear. Only Hopwell rode in silence, frowning at something beyond the horizon.
I'll be on tomorrow again, probably around the same time.
Now
definitely hope you have a good night, bro.
Unconsciously. Rand had to speak 3 times, the last sharply, before Hopwell gave a surprised jerk and booted his lanky dun up beside Tidashar. Rand studied him. The young man, not a boy any longer, no matter his age, had filled out since Rand first saw him, though his nose and ears still seemed made for a bigger man. A dragon, red enameled gold, balanced the silver sword on his high collar, just like the shield. Once he had said he would laugh a year for joy when the dragon was his. He stood unblinking at Rand as though looking through him. What you learned was good news, Rand told him. Only an effort kept him from trying to crush the dragon scepter in his fist. You did well.
Hell yeah.
He had expected the Shan-Chan to return, but not so soon.
Yeah, he'll probably be
He had
on
hoped
tomorrow
not
again.
so soon. And not leaping out of nowhere, swallowing
Yeah,
cities
just
at a
tell you have a
gulp.
good one, bro.
When he found out that merchants in Ilion had
Have a
known for
good
days
night.
before any of them thought to inform the Nine, Allah forbid they should lose a chance at profit because too many knew too much. He had been within a hair of scouring the city to its foundations. But the news was good, or as good as it could be in the circumstances. Hopwell had traveled to Amador, to the countryside nearby, and the Shan-Chan appeared to be waiting, perhaps digesting what they had consumed. The light's end, they choked on it. He forced his grip to loosen on the length of dragon-carved spearhead. If more brings Hatcher, I have time to settle Ilion before dealing with them. Abu Dar as well. The light burned the Shan-Chan. They were a distraction, one he did not need and could not afford to ignore. Hopwell said nothing, only looked. Are you upset because you had to kill women? Desura of the Musara Rain, and Lamella of the Smokewater Miagoma, and Rand forced down the instinctive litany even as it began floating across the void. New names had appeared on that list, names he did not remember adding. Lygan Arnold, a Red Sister, who had died trying to take him a prisoner to Tarvalon. Surely she had no right to a place, but she had claimed one. Bolivar Saigon, who had hanged herself rather than accept justice. Others. Men had died in thousands, by his order or by his hand, but it was the faces of the women that haunted his dreams. Each night he made himself confront their silently accusing eyes. Maybe it was their eyes he had felt of late. I told you about Damani and Suldam, he said calmly, but inside of him, rage flared, fire spiderwebbing around the emptiness of the void. The light burned me. I killed more women than all your nightmares could hold. My hands are black with the blood of women. If you hadn't wiped out that Shan-Chan patrol, they'd have killed you for sure. He did not say that Hopwell should have avoided them, avoided the need to kill them. Too late for that. I doubt that Damani even knew how to shield a man. He had no choice. And better they were all dead than some escaping with word of a man who could channel, scouting them. Absently, Hopwell touched his left sleeve, where the black color disguised fire-scarred wool. The Shan-Chan had not died easily or fast. I piled the bodies in a hollow, he said in a flat voice. The horses, everything. I burned it all to ash. White ash that floated in the wind like snow. It didn't bother me at all. Rand heard the lie in the man's tongue, but Hopwell had to learn. After all, he had. They were what they were, and that was all there was to it. All there was. Laya of the Corsita Charin, a name written in fire. Moraine Damadred, another name that seared to the soul rather than merely burning. A nameless dark friend, represented only by a face, who had died by his sword near. Majesty, Gregorin said loudly, pointing ahead. A lone man came out of the trees at the foot of the nearest hill to stand waiting in an attitude of defiance. He carried a bow, wore a pointed steel cap, and a belted mail shirt that hung nearly to his knees. Rand spurred tie-dye sharp needles, beating with the power. Saidin could protect him from man. Up close, the bowman did not make so brave a sight. Rust streaked his helmet and mail, and he looked sodden, mud to his thighs, damp hair trailing down a narrow face. Coughing hollowly, he scrubbed at a long nose with the back of his hand. His bowstring appeared taut, though. That he had protected from the rain. And the fletching on the arrows in his quiver looked dry, too. Are you the leader here? Rand demanded. You might say I do speak for him, the narrow-faced man replied warily. Why? As the others galloped up behind Rand, he shifted his feet, dark eyes like a cornered badger's. Badgers were dangerous, cornered. Watch your tongue, man, Gregorin snapped. You do speak to Randall Thor, the Dragon Reborn, Lord of the Morning and King of Ilion. Kneel to your king. What do your name be? He do be the dragon reborn, the fellow said doubtfully. Eyeing Rand from the crown on his head to his boots, lingering a moment on the gilded dragon buckling his sword belt, the man shook his head as if he had expected someone older or grander. And Lord of the Morning, you do say? Our king did never style himself so. He made no move toward kneeling or giving his name. Gregorin's face darkened at the man's tone, and maybe at the man's oblique denial of Rand as king. Markland gave a slight nod, as though he had expected no more. Damp rustlings stirred in the undergrowth among the trees. Rand heard easily, and abruptly he felt Saidin fill Hopwell. No longer staring at nothing, Hopwell studied the woodline intently, a wild light in his eyes. Dashiva, silent, raking dark hair out of his face, looked bored. Leaned forward in his saddle, and opened his mouth angrily. Fire and ice, but not yet death. Peace, Gregorin. Rand did not raise his voice, but he wove flows to carry his words, air and fire, so they boomed against the wall of trees. My offer is generous. The long-nosed man staggered at the sound, and Gregorin's horse shied. Those hidden men would hear clearly. Lay down your arms, and those who want to return home can. Those who want to follow me instead can do that. But no man leaves here under arms unless he does follow me. I know most of you are good men who answered the call of your king and the Council of Nine to defend Ilion. But I am your king now, and I'll not have anyone tempted to turn bandit. Markland nodded grimly. What about your dragon-sworn burning farms? A man's frightened voice shouted from the trees. They do be flaming bandits. What about your Aiel? Another called. I do hear they carry off whole villages. More voices from unseen men joined in, all shouting the same things. Dragon-sworn and Aiel, murderous brigands and savages. Rand ground his teeth. When the shouting faded, Narrowface said, You do see. He paused to cough, then hawked and spat, maybe for his chest and maybe for emphasis. A pitiful sight, all wet and rust, but his backbone was as tight as his bowstring. He ignored Rand's glare as easily as he did Gregorin's. You do ask us to go home unarmed, unable to defend ourselves or our families, while your people do burn and steal and kill. They do say the storm be comin', he added, and looked surprised that he had, surprised and confused for a moment. The Aiel you've heard about are my enemies. Not spiderwebs of flame this time, but solid sheets of fury that wrapped tight around the void. Rand's voice was ice, though. It roared like the fork of winter. The storm. Like he was the storm. My Aiel are hunting them down. My Aiel hunt the Shido, and they and Davram Bashir and most of the companions hunt bandits, whatever they call themselves. I am the king of Ilion, and I will allow no one to disrupt the peace of Ilion. Even if what you say do be true, Narrowface began. It is, Rand snapped. You have until midday to decide. The man frowned uncertainly. Unless the roiling clouds cleared, he might have a difficult time knowing midday. Rand gave him no relief. Decide wisely, he said. Whirling Kaidashar about, he spurred the belt into a gallop back toward the ridge without waiting for the others. Reluctantly, he let go of the power, forced himself not to hang on like a man clutching salvation with his fingernails as life and filth drained from him together. For an instant, he saw double. The world seemed to tilt dizzily. That was a recent problem, and he worried it might be part of the sickness that killed men who channeled, but the dizziness never lasted more than moments. It was the rest of letting go that he regretted. The world seemed to dull. No, it did dull, and became somehow less. Colors were washed out, the sky smaller, compared to what they had been before. He wanted desperately to seize the source again and wring the one power out of it. Always it was so when the power left him. No sooner had Saidin gone, though, than rage bubbled in its place, white-hot and searing, nearly as hot as the power had been. Sean Chan were not enough, and brigands hiding behind his name? Deadly distractions he could not afford. Was Samael reaching out from the grave? Had he sown the Shido to sprout like thorns wherever Rand laid a hand? Why? The man could not have believed he would die. And if half the tales Rand heard were true, there were more in Murundi and Altara, and the light alone knew where. Many among the Shido already taken prisoner, Ben and Aes Sedai. Would the White Power be involved somehow? Would the White Power never give him peace? Never. Never. Battling fury, he was blind to Gregorin and the rest catching up. When they topped the ridge among the waiting nobles, he drew rein so abruptly that Tidal Shah reared, pawing the air and flinging mud from his hooves. The nobles edged their mounts back, from his gelding, from him. I gave them to midday, he announced. Watch them. I don't want this lot breaking into 50 smaller bands and slipping away. I'll be in my tent. Except for wind-tossed cloaks, they might have been stone, rooted to one spot as if he meant the command to watch for them personally. At that moment, he did not care if they stayed there until they froze or melted. Without another word, he trotted down the back slope of the ridge, followed by the 2 black-coated Ashaman and his Illianer banner-bearers. Fire and ice and death was coming. But he was steel. He was steel. Chapter 14. Message from the Mahale. A mile west of the ridge, the camps began. Men and horses in cook fires, wind-flailed banners, and a few scattered tents, clumped by nationality, by house. Each camp a lake of churned mud, separated from the others by stretches of brushy heath. Men mounted and afoot watched Rand's streaming banners pass and peered toward other camps to gauge reactions. When the Aiel had been present, these men had made a single, huge camp, driven together by one of the few things they truly shared in common. They were not Aiel and feared them, however much they denied it. The world would die unless he succeeded, but he had no illusions that they shared any loyalty to him, or ever believed that the fate of the world could not be made to accommodate their own concerns, their own desires for gold or glory or power. A handful did, perhaps, a bare handful, but for the most part they followed because they feared him far more than they did the Aiel. Maybe more than they did the Dark One, in whom some did not really believe, not in the depths of their hearts, not that he could and would touch the world harder than he had already. Rand stood before their faces, and they believed in that. He accepted it, now. He had too many battles ahead of him to waste effort on one he could not win. So long as they followed and obeyed, it had to be enough. The largest of the camps was his own, and here Illianer companions in green coats with yellow cuffs rubbed shoulders with tyrant defenders of the stone in fat-sleeved coats striped black and gold, and an equal number of Karianen drawn from 40-odd houses in dark colors, some with Khan stiff above their heads. They cooked at different fires, slept apart, picketed their horses apart, and eyed one another warily, but they mingled. The safety of the Dragon Reborn was their responsibility, and they took the job seriously. Any of them might betray him, but not while the others were there to watch. Old hatreds and new dislikes would bring betrayal of any plot before the betrayer stopped to think. A ring of steel stood guard around Rand's tent, a huge peaked thing of green silk embroidered all over with bees in thread of gold. It had belonged to his predecessor, Matin Stephaneus, and had come with the crown, in a manner of speaking. Companions in burnished conical helmets stood side by side with defenders in helmets ridged and rimmed, and Karianen in bell-shaped helms, ignoring the wind, barred face guards hiding their features, halberds slanted precisely. No one moved a hair when Rand drew rein, but a bevy of servants came running to attend to him and the Ashaman. A bony woman in the green and yellow vest of a groom from the royal palace in Ilion took his bridle, while his stirrup was held by a bulbous-nosed fellow in the black and gold livery of the Stone of Tyr. They tugged forelocks to him, and cast only one sharp look at one another. Lorena Caravin, a stout, pale little woman in a dark dress, self-importantly offered him a silver tray of damp cloths from which steam rose. Karianen, she watched the other two, though more as if making sure they did their tasks properly Then with the animosity for each other, they barely hid. But with care, still. What worked with the soldiers worked with the servants as well. Drawing off his gauntlets, Rand waved away Borina's tray. Damer Flynn had risen from an ornately carved bench in front of the tent as Rand dismounted. Bald, except for a ragged white fringe, Flynn looked more a grandfather than an Ashaman. A leather-tough grandfather with a stiff leg who had seen more of the world than a farm. The sword at his hip looked as if it belonged, as well it should on a former soldier of the Queen's Guard. Rand trusted him more than most.
Cheers, Christopher.
Flynn had saved his life, after all. Flynn saluted, fist to chest, and when Rand acknowledged him with a nod, limped closer and waited until the grooms left with the horses before speaking in a low voice. Torvald's here, sent by the Mahale, he says. He wanted to wait in the council tent. I told Narishma to watch him. That had been Rand's command, though he was not sure why he had given it. No one who came from the Black Tower was to be left alone. Hesitating, Flynn fingered the dragon on his black collar. He wasn't happy to hear you had raised all of us. Wasn't he now? Rand said softly, tucking his gloves behind his sword belt. And because Flynn still looked uncertain, he added, You all earned it. He had been about to send one of the Ashaman to Taim, the leader, the Mahale, as the Ashaman all called him. But now Torvald could carry the message. In the council tent? Have a fresh one, he told Flynn, then motioned Hopwell and Shiva to follow. Flynn saluted again, but Rand was already striding away, black mud squelching around his boots. No cheers rose for him in the blustering wind. He could recall when there had been. If that was not one of Luce Theron's memories, if Luce Theron had ever been real. A flash of color just beyond the edge of sight, the feel of someone about to touch him from behind. With an effort, he focused himself. The council tent was a large, red-striped pavilion that had once sat on the plains of Laredo, now pitched in the middle of the encampment, surrounded by 30 paces of clean ground. There were never guards, unless Rand was meeting with the nobles. Anyone trying to slip in would have been seen instantly by 1,000 prying eyes. 3 banners on tall poles formed a triangle around the tent. The rising sun of Carian, the 3 crescents of Tyr, and the golden bees of Ilion. And above the crimson roof, higher than the rest, stood the dragon banner and the banner of light. The wind made them all stand out, rippling and snapping, and the tent walls shivered in the gusts. Inside, colorful fringed carpets made a floor, and the only furniture was a huge table, thickly carved and gilded, inlaid with ivory and turquoise. A jumble of maps almost hid the tabletop. Torvald lifted his head from the maps, plainly ready to give the rough side of his tongue to whoever had barged in on him. Close to his middle years and tall beside anyone save Rand or Nael, he stared coldly down a sharp nose that quivered with indignation. The sword glistened on his coat collar and the stand lamps. A silk coat, shining black, cut fine enough for a lord. His sword had silver mountings washed with gold, and a glittering red gem capped the hilt. Another gleamed darkly on a finger ring. You could not train men to be weapons without expecting a certain amount of arrogance, yet Rand did not like Torvald. But then he had no need of Luce Theron's voice to be suspicious of any man in a black coat. How far did he truly trust even Flynn? Yet he had to believe him. The Ashaman was his making, his responsibility. When Torvald saw Rand, he straightened casually and saluted, but his expression barely changed. He had had a sneering mouth the first time Rand ever saw him. My lord dragon, he said in the accents of Terrebonne, and he might have been greeting an equal, or being gracious to an inferior. His swaggering bow took in Hopwell and Shiva as well. I give congratulations on the conquest of Ilion. A great victory, yes? There would have been wine to greet you, but this young dedicated does not seem to understand orders. In the corner, silver bells on the ends of Narishma's 2 long dark braids made a faint sound as he shifted. He had tanned darkly in the southern sun, but some things about him had not changed. Older than Rand, his face made him seem younger than Hopwell, but the red that rose in his cheeks was anger, not embarrassment. His pride in the new one sword on his collar was quiet, yet deep. Torvald smiled at him, a slow smile, both amused and dangerous. Toshiba laughed, a short bark, and was still. "What are you doing here, Torvald?" Rand asked roughly. He tossed the dragon scepter and his gauntlets down atop the maps and followed them with his sword belt and scabbarded sword. The maps that Torvald had no reason to be studying. No need of Lews Theron's voice. With a shrug, Torvald produced a letter from his coat pocket and handed it to Rand. "The Mahale sent this." The paper was snowy white and thick, the seal a dragon impressed in a large oval of blue wax that glittered with golden flecks. It might almost have been thought to come from the Dragon Reborn. Taim did think well of himself. "The Mahale said to tell you that the tales of Aes Sedai and Murundi with an army, they are true. Rumor says they are rebels against Tarval." Torvald sniffed with disbelief. "But they are marching toward the Black Tower. Soon they may become a danger, yes?" Rand cracked the magnificent seal to bits between his fingers. "They are going to Caemlyn, not the Black Tower, and they're no threat. My orders were clear. Leave Aes Sedai alone unless they come after you." "But how can you be sure they are not a threat?" Torvald persisted. "Perhaps they are coming to Caemlyn, as you say, but if you are wrong, we'll not know before they attack us." "Torvald may be right," Toshiba put in thoughtfully. "I can't say I'd trust women who put me in a box. These haven't sworn any oaths. Or have they?" "I said, leave them alone!" Rand slapped the tabletop hard, and Hopwell jumped in surprise. Toshiba frowned with irritation before hurriedly smoothing it over, but Rand was not interested in Toshiba's moods. By chance, he was sure it was chance, his hand had come down on the dragon scepter. His arm trembled with the desire to take it up and stab Torvald through the heart. No need for Lews Theron at all. "The Ashaman are a weapon to be aimed where I say, not to flutter around like hens every time Taim gets frightened over a handful of Aes Sedai having dinner at the same inn. If I must, I can come back to make myself clearer." "I am sure there is no need of that," Torvald said quickly. At last, something had wiped the wry twist from his mouth. Eyes tight, he spread his hands, close to diffident, very nearly apologetic, and plainly frightened. "The Mahale, he merely wanted you informed. Your orders are read aloud every day at morning directives after the creed." "That's good." Rand kept his voice cool, kept a scowl from his face by main effort. It was his precious Mahale the man feared, not the Dragon Reborn. Afraid Taim would take it amiss if something he had said brought Rand's anger on Taim's head. "Because I'll kill any one of you who goes near those women in Murundi. You cut where I direct." Torvald bowed rigidly, murmuring, "As you say, my Lord Dragon." His teeth were bared in an attempted smile, but his nose was pinched, and he struggled to avoid meeting anyone's eyes while seeming to avoid nothing. Toshiba yelped another laugh, and Hopwell wore a small grin. Narishma was not enjoying Torvald's discomfort, though, or paying it attention. He looked at Rand without blinking, as though he sensed deep currents that the rest missed. Most women, and no few men, thought him just a pretty boy, but those two big eyes sometimes seemed more knowing than any others. Rand pulled his hand from the dragon scepter and smoothed open the letter. His hands did not quite shake. Torvald smiled weakly, sourly, noticing nothing. Against the tent wall, Narishma shifted, relaxing. The refreshments arrived then, borne by a stately procession following Borina, a line of Illianers and Carianan and Tyrans in their various liveries. There was a servant bearing a silver tray and pitcher for each kind of wine, and two more with trays of silver mugs for hot punch and spiced wines, and fine-blown goblets for the others. A pink-faced fellow in green and yellow carried a tray on which to do the pouring, and a dark woman in black and gold was there to actually handle the pitchers. There were nuts and candied fruits, cheeses and olives, each sort requiring a serving man or woman. Under Borina's direction, they flowed in a formal dance, bowing, curtsying, one giving way to another as they made their offerings. Accepting spiced wine, Rand hoisted himself onto the edge of the table and sat the steaming mug beside him, untouched as he busied himself with the letter. There was no address, no preamble of any kind. Taim hated giving Rand any sort of title, though he tried to hide the fact. I have the honor to report that 29 Ashaman, 97 dedicated, and 322 soldiers are now enrolled at the Black Tower. There have been a handful of deserters, unfortunately, whose names have been stricken, but losses in training remain acceptable. I now have as many as 50 recruiting parties in the field at any given time, with the result that 3 or 4 men are added to the rolls almost every day. In a few months, the Black Tower will equal the White, as I said it would. In a year, Tarvalin will tremble at our numbers. I harvested that blackberry bush myself. A small bush and thorny, but a surprising number of berries for the size. Mazrim Taim, Mahail. Rand grimaced, putting the blackberry bush out of his mind. What had to be done had to be done. The whole world paid a price for his existence. He would die for it, but the whole world paid. There were other things to grimace over anyway. 3 or 4 new men a day? Taim was optimistic. In a few months, at that rate, there would be more men who could channel than Aes Sedai, true, but the newest sister had years of training behind her. And part of that specifically taught how to deal with a man who could channel. He did not want to contemplate any encounter between Ashaman and Aes Sedai who knew what they were facing. Blood and regret could be the only outcome, whatever happened. The Ashaman were not aimed at the White Tower, though, no matter what Taim thought. It was a convenient belief, however, if it made Tarvalin step warily. An Ashaman only needed to know how to kill. If there were enough to do that at the right place and time, if they lived long enough to, that was all they had been created for. How many deserters, Torval? He said quietly. He picked up the wine mug and took a swallow, as if the answer were unimportant. The wine should have been warming, but the ginger and sweet sorrel and mace tasted bitter on his tongue. How many losses in training? Torval was recovering himself over the refreshments, rubbing his hands and arching an eyebrow at the choice of wines, making a great show of knowing the best, making a show of lording it. Dashiva had accepted the first offered, and stood glowering into his twisted stem goblet as though it held swill. Pointing to one of the trays, Torval cocked his head thoughtfully, but he had the words ready on his tongue. 19 deserters so far. The Mahail, he has ordered them killed whenever they are found, and their heads brought back for examples. Plucking a bit of glazed pear from the proffered tray, he popped it into his mouth and smiled brightly. 3 heads hang like fruit on the traitor's tree at this moment. Good, Rand said levelly. Men who ran now could not be trusted not to run later, when lives depended on them standing. And these men could not be allowed to go their own way. Those fellows back on the hills, if they escaped in a body, were less dangerous than one man trained in the Black Tower. The traitor's tree? Taim was a great one for naming things, but men needed the trappings, the symbols and the names, the black coats and the pins, to help hold them together, until it was time to die. The next time I visit the Black Tower, I want to see every deserter's head. A second piece of candied pear, halfway to Torval's mouth, dropped from his fingers and streaked the front of his fine coat. It might interfere with recruiting, making that sort of effort, he said slowly. The deserters, they do not announce themselves. Rand held the other man's gaze until it fell. How many losses in training? He demanded. The sharp-nosed Ashaman hesitated. How many? Narishma leaned forward, staring intently at Torval. So did Hopwell. The servants continued their smooth, silent dance, offering their trays to men who no longer saw them. Borina took advantage of Narishma's preoccupation to make sure his silver mug held more hot water than spiced wine. Torval shrugged, too casually. 51, all told. 13 burned out, and 28 dead where they stood.
You alive there, buddy?
The rest,
Can't
The
do that.
Mahale,
You scare me,
he
boy.
adds something to their wine, and they do not wake.
You're sleeping heavy, huh?
Abruptly, his tone turned malicious.
Can't do that with
It can come
the art,
suddenly,
boy.
at any time. One man began screaming that spiders were crawling beneath his skin on his second day. He smiled viciously at Narishma and Hopwell,
My
and
dogs
nearly
were
so at
trying to
Rand,
scare me.
but it was to the other two he addressed himself, swinging his head between them. You see, not to worry if you slide into madness. You'll not hurt yourselves or a soul. You go to sleep. Forever. Kinder than gentling, even if we knew how. Kinder than leaving you insane and cut off, yes? Narishma stared back, taut as a harp string, his mug forgotten in his hand. Hopwell was once more frowning at something only he could see.
I don't know why my dog
Kinder,
likes doing that.
Rand said in a flat
Well,
voice,
my
setting
small
the mug
one,
back beside him on the
anyways.
table. Something in the wine.
He'll lay there and fall asleep with
My soul is
his
black
tongue
with blood.
sticking out about that
Dead.
far.
It was not a hard thought, not biting or edged. A simple statement of fact. A mercy any man might wish for, Torvald. Torvald's cruel smile faded, and he stood breathing hard. The sums were easy. 1 man in 10 destroyed, 1 man in 50 mad, and more surely to come.
Snoopy.
Early days yet, and no way till the day you died to know you had beaten the odds.
Buddy.
Except that the odds would beat you one way or another in the end. Whatever else,
Won't be
Torvald
much
stood under
longer.
that threat too.
Hell yeah, Christopher.
Abruptly, Rand became aware of Borina. It took a
Won't
moment
be
before he
much longer,
recognized the
buddy,
expression
okay?
on her face, and when he did,
Won't be that
he
much
bit back
longer
cold
till we go to
words.
bed, okay?
How dare she feel pity? Did she think Tarmangaden could be won without blood? The prophecies of the dragon
Won't be much
demanded
longer.
blood
What do
like
you say?
rain.
I'll lay
Leave
here
us,
if you
he
want,
told her,
okay?
and she quietly
It won't
gathered
be
the
much
servants.
longer, buddy.
But she still carried compassion in her eyes as she herded them out. Casting around for a way to change the mood, Rand found nothing. Pity weakened as surely as fear, and they had to be strong. To face what they had to face, they all must be steel. His making, his responsibility. Lost in his own thoughts, Narishma peered into the steam rising from his wine, and Hopwell still tried to stare through the side of the tent. Torvald cast sideways glances at Rand and struggled to put the scornful twist back on his mouth. Dashiva alone appeared unaffected, with his arms folded, studying Torvald as a man might study a horse offered for sale. Into the painfully stretching silence burst a husky, wind-blown young man in black with the sword and dragon on his collar. Of an age with Hopwell, still not old enough to marry most places, Bedwin Moore wore intensity more closely than his shirt. He moved on his toes, and his eyes had the look of a hunting cat that knew itself hunted in turn. He had been different once, and not so long ago. The Shonchan will move from Abu Dar soon, he said as he saluted. They mean to come against Ilion next. Hopwell gave a start and a gasp, jolted out of his dark study. Once again, Dashiva's response was to laugh, mirthlessly this time. Nodding, Rand took up the dragon scepter. After all, he carried it for remembrance. The Shonchan danced to their own tune, not the song he wished for. If Rand received the announcement in silence, Torvald did not. Finding his sneer, he raised a contemptuous eyebrow. Did they tell you all that now? He said mockingly. Or have you learned to read minds? Let me tell you something, boy. I have fought against Amadisians and Damani both, and no army takes a city, then packs itself up to march 1,000 miles. More than 1,000 miles. Or do you think they can travel? Moore met Torvald's derision calmly. Or if it unsettled him at all, the only sign he gave was running a thumb down his long sword hilt. I did talk to some of them. Most were Terrabonners, and more landing by ship every day, or near enough. Shouldering past Torvald to the table, he favored the Terrabonner with a level look. All stepping right quick, whenever anybody with a slurring way of speech opened a mouth. The elder man opened his, angrily, but the younger pressed on hurriedly to Rand. They're putting soldiers all along the Venir Mountains. 500, sometimes 1,000 together, all the way to Aran Head already. And they're buying or taking every wagon and cart within 20 leagues of Abu Dar, and the animals to draw them. Carts, Torvald exclaimed. Wagons! Is it that they mean to hold a market fair, do you think? And what fool would march an army through mountains when there are perfectly good roads? He noticed Rand watching him, and cut off with a small frown, suddenly uncertain. I told you to stay low more. Rand let anger touch his voice. The young Ashman had to step back as he jumped down from the table. Not to go asking the Shanchan their plans. To look and stay low. I was careful. I didn't wear my pins. Moore's eyes did not change for Rand, still hunter and hunted in one. He seemed to be boiling inside. Had Rand not known better, he would have thought Moore held the power, struggling to survive Sayadine, even as it gave him life 10 times over. His face seemed to want to sweat. If any of the men I talked to knew where they were going next, they didn't say, and I didn't ask. But they were willing to complain over a mug of ale about marching all the time and never standing still. In Abu Dar, they were soaking up all the ale in the city as fast as they could because they say they have to march again. And they're gathering wagons, just like I said. That all came out in a rush, and he clamped his teeth at the end as though to trap more words that wanted to fly from his tongue. Smiling suddenly, Rand clapped him on the shoulder. You did well. The wagons would have been enough, but you did well. Wagons are important, he added, turning to Torvald. If an army feeds off the country, it eats what it finds. Or not, if it doesn't. Torvald had not flickered an eyelid at hearing of Shanchan and Abu Dar. If that tale had reached the Black Tower, why had Taim not mentioned it? Rand hoped his smile did not look a snarl. It's harder to arrange supply trains, but when you have one, you know there's fodder for the animals and beans for the men. The Shanchan organize everything. Sorting through the maps, he found the one he wanted and spread it out, waited at one side with his sword, and at the other with the dragon scepter. The coast between Ilion and Abu Dar stared up at him, rimmed for most of its length by hills and mountains, dotted with fishing villages and small towns. The Shanchan did organize. Abu Dar had been theirs barely more than a week, but the merchants' eyes and ears wrote of repairs well underway on the damage done to the city in its taking, of clean sick houses set up for the ill, of food and work arranged for the poor and those driven from their homes by troubles inland. The streets and the surrounding countryside were patrolled so that no one need fear footpads or bandits, day or night, and while merchants were welcome, smuggling had been cut to a trickle, if not less. Those honest Illianer merchants had been surprisingly glum about the smuggling. What were the Shanchan organizing now? The others gathered around the table as Rand perused the map. There were roads hard along the coast, but poor straggling things marked as little more than cart paths. The broad trade roads lay inland, avoiding the worst of the terrain and the worst of what the Sea of Storms had to offer. Men raiding out of those mountains would make passage difficult for anyone trying to use the inland roads, he said finally. By controlling the mountains, they make the roads safe as a city street. You're right, Moore. They are coming to Ilion. Leaning on his fists, Torvald glared at Moore, who had been right when he was wrong. A grievous sin, perhaps, in Torvald's book. Even so, it will be months before they can trouble you here, he said sullenly. 100 Ashaman? 50, placed in Ilion, could destroy any army in the world before one man crosses the causeways. I doubt any army with Damani is destroyed as easily as one kills Aiel, committed to an attack and caught by surprise, Rand said quietly, and Torvald stiffened. Besides, I have to defend all of Ilion, not just the city. Ignoring the man, Rand traced lines across the map with a finger. Between Aran Head and the city of Ilion lay 100 leagues of open water across the mouth of Kabal Deep, where, ship captains in Ilion said, their longest sounding lines could find no bottom just a mile or so from the shore. The waves there could overturn ships as they surged north to pound the coast with breakers 15 paces high. In this weather, it would be worse. Marching around the deep was a route of 200 leagues to reach the city, even keeping to the shortest ways. But if the Shanchan pressed on from Aran Head, they could reach the border in 2 weeks despite the rainstorms. Maybe less. Better to fight where he chose, not where they did. His fingers slid along the south coast of Altara, along the Venier Range, until the mountains dwindled to hills short of Abu Dar. 500 here, 1,000 there. A tantalizing string.
All right, everyone, gonna call into this live for tonight. I want to thank Evan for stopping by, and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.